What's going on, guys? Welcome back to SPOILERCAST, a Hungry Gamers offshoot that aims to inform, entertain, and educate you on one particular release from within the geek culture universe. And on this episode, we are tackling none other than a game that was released on July 20 on Xbox and PC, and more recently on the 24th of November for the PS5 and Switch. It's currently sitting with Metacritic scores of 88 on the Switch, 85 on PC, 87 on Xbox, and an average of 85 for the PS5. Developed by a small indie team at Acid Nerve and published by Devolver Digital, today we are talking about the isometric action RPG and Game of the Year candidate, Death's Door. I'm your host, Jono Pech, and I'm joined by Death's Door superfan, Paul James from Player 2 and the Dev Diary podcast. Welcome to Paul. How you doing?
Yeah, look, superfan's about the right word to use. I have been screaming and shouting about this game since the moment it came out. Since before it came out, in fact. Almost since it resurfaced at E3 earlier this year. I've been talking about how great this game was going to be, and it was just fantastic that the final product was meeting all the expectations and hype that I had. But otherwise, I'm doing really well. How about you?
Yeah, really good. Pleased to be here. Pleased to have been able to score a code from the Devolver crew.
Thanks to Power Up.
Thanks to Power Up, who were in the credits for this game. So shout out to our friends Doug,
Jaden, and the team.
Jaden. Yeah, they got in there, which is pretty cool. When I saw them come down on the screen, I was like, hey, it's the boys, the Aussie boys, making their way in this.
I know those guys.
Yeah, so that was cool. But I pulled in you, Paul, mostly because Brendan and Ali, they've both enjoyed this game as well. You know, people listening to this are like, this isn't Brendan and Ali. No, we've taken over the THG RSS feed to bring this podcast to you, because Brendan and Ali are busy, much like Santa Claus at this time of the year, and that's why he sends his helpers out to the shopping centres, and that's what we are. We're the
helpers.
Santa's little helpers. Yeah, while the real big cheese is out getting ready for those, the 8-Bitties awards and the Festivus episode coming up. There's a lot happening at Hungry HQ. So Brendan and Ali, they did really enjoy this game, and I think they recommended it themselves on THG, but they've sent us in here to talk about it today. So we're talking about Death's Door. So these crows that exist in a realm called the Hall of Doors, where the player character is tasked with reaping souls of the dead, which you can access through a series of doors that portal into these different areas. It all runs amok when you're assigned a soul that's been stolen, and that sets off a journey to track down a series of villains who have lived well past the expiration date. And of course, that brings us to Death's Door. So, Paul, tell me a bit about your experience with this game. Give us the mini kind of recap of your experience as far as the first time you played it, revisiting it with the PS5, and why has it struck such a nerve with you? You play a lot of games, you review a lot of games for Player 2. What is it about Death's Door as this little indie that's just grabbed your attention so much?
I think the thing that's impressed me the most, actually, is the fact that we see a lot of games that maybe really excel in certain areas. Maybe their storytelling's fantastic, or the moment-to-moment gameplay is awesome, or maybe it's just incredible visuals that they're delivering. Whatever the element might be, maybe you get one or two of those. But I feel like Death's Door ticks almost every single box. In my mind, every single box. But I'll be generous, just for anyone out there that might want to try and pick the teeth out of it a little bit.
We'll see.
It's just such a masterclass in a whole bunch of aspects, and I haven't even spoken about the audio, like the soundtrack side of things, and I'm going to dive deep on that a little bit later on. But it's just one of those games that I really struggle to find fault in anywhere.
It certainly achieves exactly what it's set out to do.
Yeah.
It reminds me a bit of Hollow Knight in that sense, where not just the obvious Australian connection, or not Australian connection, but the small indie studio connection. Like Acid Nerve is, from what I can gather, two guys who've pulled in a bunch of artists to work on the game with them. Yeah, so there's a lot of artists that work on this game, and you can tell because the art is top notch, and it's hard to imagine like a programmer or a game designer having that level of artistic talent. The game looks amazing, music's awesome. They've brought in some great contractors to make the game sing, and that could be Devolver Digital's deep pockets that have been able to make that happen. But regardless, like, you look at Titan Souls, which was their first, well, not their, I don't know if it was their first game, but it was the first game that I played from them. Yeah, in their previous game, which was in some ways kind of a precursor to this, as far as like the world feeling, the way that the world feels to explore and navigate. You know, there's an eeriness, an emptiness, a loneliness to it that you could say is similar. But yeah, like
they're totally really similar. That's a good point.
And they're both centered not as much in Death's Door, but they're centered around these big boss encounters as well. You can tell that they have a lot of passion for the boss fight and the tradition of a boss fight, because whilst Titan Souls is all boss fights and Death's Door isn't built in that way, everything certainly leads towards those moments in this game. So yeah, in that respect, I think what they've attempted to do and the way they've attempted to do it, they've really just nailed it, basically. I've got some smaller criticisms, but I totally get why this has resonated with you so much. It's not quite as high on my Game of the Year list, but we'll get to that later. And I should tell our dear listeners, this is going to be spoiler-free initially. We're going to talk about the different elements of the game that we liked. We're going to recommend it, possibly, and then we'll get into the spoilers towards the end. So let's dig into the story, Paul. What was your take on that? Tell us, keeping it spoiler-free, how you felt about the narrative component of Death's Door.
Yeah, I mean, not dissimilar to what you said before when you were describing Titan Souls. Death's Door, the world itself just leaves this really kind of hollow, empty feeling in the stomach. Just as you're moving around, like everything's really, like everyone's really quite downtrodden. The world has seen better days. Even the well lit, illuminated parts of the world that you explore, and there are some. It's not all just kind of gloomy greys and blacks and those sort of things. In fact, I'd probably argue there's more well lit areas than darker ones. But even those just have this really oppressive sort of feel about them. There are some little light spots in there. For the most part, that is the characters themselves. We're going to obviously dive into some of those more specifically soon, but it's some of the character interactions that really, really hooked me. The plot, fairly engaging. It's a little by the numbers in some senses. Like you can kind of see where they're going at a point. It's a bit basic in that respect, but still hits the mark. I really, really enjoyed everything in that space.
Yeah, for sure. I think the setting does a lot of the heavy lifting with the narrative. Like you have a real sense of place as you're going around. Not just that initial Hall of Doors area that's black and white and just so drab and desolate, really. Like the game starts, you're this crow. I didn't even know that you play as a crow when I started playing, because I've kind of avoided like seeing too much of this, and I probably saw a few clips, but the character sprite's quite small on my phone, so I wasn't like, okay. But yeah, playing as a crow with a sword or an umbrella, and it's like, okay, this is a bit quirky and it's a bit fun, and the dialogue is always pretty lighthearted. So I think, yeah, the way that the world is built, along with those creative, quirky personalities, that does a lot of the heavy lifting for the narrative. The story itself didn't completely pull me in, but I think it does give you like enough motivation to push towards the goal that you have as the character towards completing their task. And really, like the feeling that I had so much of the time that I was playing was like, it's like a modern take on that classic Zelda gameplay where you're in this overworld. And even like the NES Zelda, like you're in this world, you're exploring, there's enemies, you find these dungeons to go deeper into, and it's really got that that feeling of like many games have done since then, but you get these power-ups to extend your ability to explore more, and really that just adventurous feeling, and the fact that it's just a basic, like you're pressing one or two buttons for combat, there's a dodge, you're evading and learning each enemy's movements to evade them or to get the edge on them. Like that really took me back to like playing The Legend of Zelda way back in that like the 8-bit style. Being isometric and simple art really gave me that feeling more than like a Breath of the Wild or a Skyward Sword does, as far as like being the modern version of those older games. So I really like that, and it's kind of that mixed with a bit of Dark Souls-iness as far as like that, the tougher combat fights, because there are some difficult sections, like whether it's like the waves of enemies or some platforming mixed with the waves of enemies or the boss fights themselves, which we'll get to when we talk about the combat later on. But yeah, like there's only one of these sections that's, there's sections that are meant to be hard, and there's only one of them that I actually beat the first try, which, as the game goes on, you start to get more of a feel for the way the enemies are going to approach you, or for the way that you can exploit them or use your own abilities. So it's definitely got that learning curve, and you get better as you play. So we'll talk more about the gameplay now. I think there's a loop in this game that really keeps it fresh. Like there's open areas with combat and puzzles and platforming, and then you come across these like waves of combat, and then there's those sections that you love so much. Oh. How do you pronounce it? Is it
Avarice?
Avarice, yeah.
That's how I pronounce it.
And they're like these boss kind of ish rush waves of combat. Then there's some kind of platforming challenge, and then there's like a real boss fight, like a big boss fight. And so that kind of loop of those different things happens like 3 or 4 times throughout the game, and because of that, it never feels like you're grinding or repeating the same kind of thing, because it's moving through those different sections, and there's enough variance there that before you know it, you're getting towards the end of the game. And that, I think that really keeps it fresh, and that really made the game sing for me.
Yeah, I mean, even that loop that you highlighted there, you do it 3 to 4 times, as you said, but by the time you return to the next one, you've got a new skill set, or you've just developed additional proficiency because you've just spent more time playing as the crow. So you've got all of these little changes that have occurred, and even the challenges that they throw at you themselves. Avarice is more of a gauntlet. You're just going to see out a few waves of enemies. But then the platforming challenges will be different. The boss and what they throw at you is different in terms of the way they attack you, or the way that you need to use the environment to beat them, or whatever the case happens to be. So yeah, despite the fact that yes, that loop kind of goes on 3 or 4 times, they change enough each time layered on top of your enhanced abilities as the crow, but also as the player controlling the crow, that everything feels fresh. Despite the fact that you're coming back to these sequences multiple times, which is fantastic. Means the difficulty curve is about spot on. You're right in what you said before. There are some crushing moments, and I certainly found myself. I think my recollection when I was playing the Xbox version didn't happen again when I was playing the PlayStation, because I kind of had, I guess, the sea legs already. But when I played it the first time, there was one boss encounter in particular that I would have died 15, 20 times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, and I guess the beauty about it though is that you know what it is that you need to do. Like you can recognize, okay, this is my opportunity to strike, or whatever. Here's the weak spot, whatever that thing happens to be. But executing it consistently is the whole other thing, or just the thing that I think we all find, as people who play a fair few action games, regardless of whether they're of this style or not, is there's a tendency to run in there and swing and get real aggressive or whatever, and then you've only got a very limited time to do that. You need to get out, and sometimes you bite off more than you can chew, and you take a big hit or something like that. And the crow doesn't have a huge amount of health.
Yeah, it's a real reward versus risk situation in those moments, and you have to decide, okay, maybe this is a boss where I only try and swipe them once and then I get out of there.
Exactly.
Or maybe I can, while they're going through this set animation, I know that I can hit them 4 times. And so you start building that kind of knowledge and strategy until you have it down pat, and you're just I know exactly what I need to do, but I stuffed up, or I fell off the edge, I rolled too far, so I just have to get a perfect run, and I know I can do it.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's a
Even like knowing what the crow can do. Like if you've got the standard sword, for example, it's 3 strikes, and then like that's the kind of sequence you can get, and then there's a little pause before you can kind of go again. Regardless of the fact that there's upgrade trees and you can speed up those times, you can increase the amount of damage you do, all those sorts of little things. It's a very light skill tree. Even with those things there, even at max, there's still that little gap between your 3 strikes. So you have to recognize that, and sometimes it's can I get that 4th or 5th one in, or am I actually putting myself at risk by doing that? And it's a decision that you need to make, and if you've made the wrong decision, the game will punish you for it. It's fair in that respect.
And it is. It's very fair, and I love something that they've done in this game. Like I can't recall it being used elsewhere, and I'm sure it has, but you have a set amount of ammo or spirit or mana or whatever you want to call it, magic points to shoot either like a bow and arrow or a fireball or whatever it might be. And when that runs out, you have to like get in an actual melee strike for it to replenish. And that I felt was a really genius move, because it means you can't just sit back and do long range attacks the whole time. You do have to, regardless of what the enemy is and the way that you want to approach it. At some point you have to go in for a few of those attacks, and that's when you have to kind of be a bit more careful. So I love that they threw that in there.
Yeah, I mean, I would try to sit back when I can, and like, especially you've taken a couple of hits and things are a little bit dicey, and you try and fire away a few shots, and you might hit the target, but it's, geez, I hope this is enough. Like this really needs to do the job, because otherwise I'm putting myself at risk getting back in there again. One shot and I'm down. So you do that, but you know that you only had a couple opportunities, and you just had to cross your fingers and hope that they stuck, which was fantastic. And I have to shout out, and we're going to keep talking about it at various points, but those Avarice combat sequences, it's the combination of all the arts coming together there, from the combat itself and how great that feels, to the music, to the way it looks. I'm just in love with those sequences, and we'll talk more about that in more detail.
Yeah, as they went on, like the first one kind of is somewhat of a surprise, because you probably think that you're about to fight the boss, and then it comes in instead.
Waves and waves coming and kick your teeth in.
Yeah, and after that I started to look forward to them, because it was like, all right, let's see if I've like learnt what I need to learn since the last time, and
crack the knuckles and off.
Because if you can't beat that, then you don't really stand a chance against the boss that's coming up. Another thing that I wanted to mention while we're talking about gameplay was the platforming. That's an element that didn't exist in those like older Zelda games, or even like the Dark Souls-y kinds of games. I think it adds a lot to this experience to be able to zip around. You get the hook shot eventually, and that always felt good, and it always felt really responsive to that ability. Not having a jump button at first, I was like, okay, this is going to make things interesting. It takes away that type of platforming, but it replaces it with another type, which the dive roll, which is, it's more like, instead of trying to get up to places, it's like taking the higher ground and getting to a lower point sometimes, or figuring out like there's also a great sense of exploration, like I've mentioned, but that rewards the player in ways where if you just look around a little bit, you will find some items that make things a bit easier, or the shrines that will give you a health boost or an MP boost. So it always felt like you're rewarded for the time that you put into exploring.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's little nuggets hidden around the world in that sense that you can find that help kind of build out the lore of the world, but also in those combat sequences, you are rewarded for kind of utilizing those abilities that you've got, which extends to even the magic. Like you referenced, obviously the arrow that you can shoot. There's a number of magical abilities as well that you can unlock. That's all mapped to that same kind of mana bar, I guess, for want of a better phrase. The way they just bring all these little elements together just works a treat. Feels great.
And it's not easy to do. Like it's not every game, indie or otherwise, that doesn't overstay its welcome in any sense, really. Like there was never a point in this game, not that it's like a
It's not a long
as
game.
long as Hollow Knight or anything, but
Yeah.
it's a lot meatier than I expected it to be, and it took me a lot longer to finish than I thought it would. Some of that's down to like the difficulty of particular sections, but there's when you add in all that exploration that you're able to do, and there's even boss fights that optional boss fights that I never encountered in the game, so they're out there somewhere.
Yeah, go exploring. There's some cool stuff, especially some cool stuff end game that, in the interest of transparency, I didn't complete all of it when I played the game the first time. Thankfully, I wasn't having to do the actual review. I got to kind of kick back and enjoy in that respect. But with the decision being that when I played it on the PlayStation, knowing that it was only a matter of time before it would come across, that was where I was going to really dive into it and clean up all of that stuff that I kind of left behind the first time around. But yes, there are some cool additional bosses and just things to do at the end there.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. I might have to jump back in. I kind of put it down once I was finished. But yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out.
I guess without spoiling something, there's like after you defeat whoever the final boss is, there's something that drops afterwards, which actually kind of is what gets the ball rolling for some end game stuff.
Right. Okay, so we've been talking a little bit already about the combat and the weapons, but let's dive into that. What was your kind of key strategy as you approached the combat in this game, Paul?
Look, for the most part, I actually stuck with the sword. There are a few other...
The base weapon, yeah.
Yeah, which is the base weapon. There are a few others that you can pick up along the way, many of which are pretty easily missed. I don't know if you found that. Most are pretty easily missed. But I stuck with the sword. I felt comfortable in that, I guess, talking before, about, okay, it's 3 strikes and then you need potentially to get out of there or, reassess whatever the case happens to be. I felt very comfortable with that cycle very, very quickly. So I just got into my groove. But at the same time, I did mess around with some of the others and I just didn't feel as compelled by them. Whether it was the axe, for example, which, heavier damage, but that slower turnaround just wasn't quite right for me personally.
Yeah, it breaks it down really well as far as like the strengths and weaknesses of each weapon in the menu. And I agree, like it almost never really felt worth it to deviate away from the sword because, the axe might be slightly more powerful, but it has one less strike before the crow has to take a breather, I guess. And the daggers, you get the extra strikes, but they don't do as much damage. So I probably used the sword, the original weapon, for like 80% of the game. There was a couple of bosses that I was fighting where I realized that, I was only able to get 1 strike in before I had to dodge away. So I thought, if I'm only going to do 1 strike, I might as well use the axe to get that extra damage. So I did implement it there. And occasionally I was fighting like bigger groups of enemies that just by taking a single hit, it kind of interrupted their attack. So I thought, the daggers might become more useful in that instance. So, I guess you can strategize it that way, but you don't have to. Like, the game's not that difficult that you have to be like, okay, what weapon am I going to use here?
Yeah, you can still just push through as I described.
Yeah, and I did manage to unlock all the weapons. There's like a blue great sword that I used for the last couple of boss sequences, which is really handy. And I love the fire ability. The way one of the things that was difficult was like it's not really clear how much damage each thing is doing, because it tells you like with the weapons how much damage, but then that doesn't really change as you upgrade your attacks. It doesn't say, it started at 1 damage and now that you've upgraded,
now it does 2.
Your attack completely, it's 4 damage or it's 2 damage. But I did like that the fire could like do a bit of damage over time, so you could kind of, especially if like what you were saying before, you've taken a few hits already, you can sit back, throw a fireball, let it do its damage over time. Okay, still not dead. I guess I'll throw another fireball. Still not dead. Okay, I guess I better go in.
Have to get back in there
for a few swipes.
I guess to your point though about the indicators of damage. Now you're right. There's not some numerical thing that's really apparent. The bosses, they do a really good job of that. You kind of see most people I guess would have seen, regardless of whether you played the game or not. There's the big castle encounter that you deal with at the very beginning of the game. it's I guess the second boss in the game, and like it especially looks phenomenal as you start doing damage to the whole thing. You see like these pinky red sort of cracks starting to appear throughout it, and like you do see that degradation in the body there that's kind of meant to represent the fact that you're doing damage, but it is still a bit of a guessing game, I guess, as to whether you've actually done when you've done enough, or when that final blow is going to come along, or whatever. It's not.
It lets you know that you're getting somewhere, like you're making some progress. Like I like that, especially like there's some enemies or bosses where you're not sure if what you're doing is working because they're not vulnerable unless you hit them from a certain direction or whatever. Yep. So you know that I've hit them like 10 times with fireballs and nothing's happened, and he's still not glowing. So I guess what I'm doing is not working. Yeah, that is a nice little design touch that conveys a lot without having a health bar, which keeps the mystery. I think like when you hit that killer blow, like that death blow, it always felt so good because you were kind of surprised that that's when it happened, because they didn't have that like one slither of health left to show that you were almost there.
Like, yeah, the boss design was sensational. It's and I kind of touched on this before. It's not necessarily hard to identify what to actually do, and I guess referencing points you made before. Okay, the boss is invincible, and if you hit him from this angle, but if you get here, there's a weak spot or whatever the case. Like, you can identify those things fairly easily, but again, being able to execute and do it consistently enough that you'll survive is the real challenge of the game. And again, not biting off too much and all those sorts of little things, those little variables that if you just mess up 2 or 3 times, it brings you unstuck. And maybe it's just I swung one too many times here, or I dodged to the wrong spot here, which means I got clipped. Even though I was trying to get away, I jumped left instead of right, and so it actually meant that I was still in its turning circle or swing cycle, or whatever the case happened to be. It's all those sort of little things that you learn that make the bosses quite easy once you work it all out, but at first they can seem really hard to approach.
Yeah, and one of the things that I liked is that we both play a lot of games, and over time, especially in this type of game, the bosses all tend to have like similar strategies. Like, you got to jump on their head and then you can attack them, or whatever it is. Or like they've got a glowing, they've got a glowing shoe, so you have to wait till that shoe's glowing a different color, and then you like step on their foot. Like, whatever it is, it's like there's these tropes in boss fights that I think they avoided really well, where there was never, for me at least, on the first encounter, a completely obvious strategy. It was always like I had to probably die like 3, 4, maybe 5 times, and then go, right, I've got it. Like, that's what I need to do. How do I do it? And then from there, getting better and better. It starts off like, if I can get to this point without getting hit, then I know that I'll have a better chance. And then as you get better, it's like, okay, I think I can get to this point only getting hit once, and eventually you just feel like you've figured it out. And I think that was a lot of the fun in those encounters, was just figuring out how to beat them. And we'll talk about that a bit more in the spoiler section in terms of like the specifics of the bosses. We just, for the people that haven't played the game yet, we won't mention what they were or what that was like. But we'll move into, I guess, the graphics, the performance of the game. For me, on the PS5, even though it was pre-release day patch, this game ran so smooth for me that I didn't come across, I think, any glitches. I didn't have any crashes. Not that it's a super intensive game as far as like ray tracing and stuff.
Yeah.
But even just like learning from my experience with Trigger Witch, like there are still a lot of things that can go wrong with any game. So to have it perform that well with no hiccups or anything, they've definitely nailed that as far as like cleaning it up for an early release.
Yeah, I mean, it was flagged to us before launch that there was a pre-launch patch coming for the PS5 version, and they told us exactly what we should be looking out for, and I still didn't have any problems with it
Yeah, I didn't know. I forgot it straight away, and I didn't notice anything.
I forgot too, and then went back and read it like, oh, hang on, I already passed that. Well, nothing to see here. So credit to them. There must be only a very, very special circumstance, but even that's been patched out now for anyone who's picking the game up day one. So nothing to worry about in that respect. But yeah, I mean, the performance of the game is fantastic. It runs really, really well across. I won't speak to the Switch. Obviously, we haven't played it on that yet. The way I'm going, I'll probably end up getting it there at some point. But anyway, having played it across both of the most modern consoles in the Series X and the PS5, no performance issues whatsoever. The visual style of the game, the art style of the game it just holds up so well consistently. The way the standard sword, that kind of pinky reddy color that it has, the way that just kind of pierces the environment it's actually like kind of a really nice warming feeling. I found that
it looks kind of like a lightsaber. Like at the start of the game, like you're in a black and white area, and there's dark pockets. So if you like run into the darkness, all you can see is the sword. And I was like, it reminds me of like a red lightsaber, basically.
Without spoiling too much for people if they're behind on Rogue One, and maybe a certain character's lightsaber lighting up at the end there, the way that just illuminates the darkness. Yes. That's quite cool though. And yeah, look, I mean, I didn't necessarily draw that comparison in my head, but it's not a bad one. And yeah, I mean, it looks and feels so good to use. So I mean, that's great. But yeah, no performance issues. The game looks amazing, and then I guess another element to the whole presentational side is that soundtrack, which, like, what David Fenn's put together is incredible. David Fenn is one of those two actually that's part of the team. He's not one of those contractors.
Really?
He's one of the two leading it.
Far out. He's good.
Yeah, he's real good.
There's so many great musical sequences. Like, I know that you're a big fan of the Avarice, but the section after that in the first dungeon, it's a platforming section just before you get to the boss.
Yeah.
And my wife was kind of just in the room as I was playing, and she's like, that sounds like Stranger Things. And I was like, well, it's not like synthesizers and the 80s keyboards, but I see what she meant. It's like the arpeggiating notes going up and down in that kind of way that like builds a real intensity. And that really made that sequence really memorable for me, as well as like the platforming that was coming into it for the first time in that loop.
It's just, it all fits, like, regardless of the scenario. In just like, it's not just good music, but it's how it's been implemented as well. That's really been quite important here. I can't think of any sequences now where there was that jarring feeling of like, this doesn't quite fit. Everything, as well as being just incredibly composed, the way it's been then implemented into the game is sensational. So I'm in love with what David Fenn has led there. And I guess like you referenced early on Titan Souls being their past work. Tracks like Avarice actually were in Titan Souls. But like a bit of the music has been kind of reworked and adjusted and modernized and kind of even tonally tweaked to fit what they were going for Death's Door. So actually, if someone was to sit there and listen to the soundtrack from Titan Souls and then Death's Door, or just having played Death's Door, you'll notice actually a bit of a through line between those in a few specific areas. Avarice is one of those, but there's several others. So that's a fascinating little, I guess, point of comparison between the two games as well.
Yeah, the way that the music works with the art style really sings, I think, and I also love the isometric perspective in this game. Like, it could have just been the top-down thing like Titan Souls, but going for that isometric view, I think it makes it a bit more interesting to navigate. And they do some cool stuff playing with the camera angle occasionally, where you'll find a secret area and the camera will like do like a 90-degree pivot, and you're like, oh, that's what's on the other side of the wall. And that's always a really cool moment. All right, well, that brings us to nitpicks and gripes. which might be a shorter little section before we head into spoiler territory. But Paul, was there anything that you wanted to get off your chest? You love this game. Tell us, is it perfect?
I mean, yes, but I get the only thing that's like I could, in terms of nitpicking, I would have liked more incentive to try out some of the other weapons. We've referenced them.
Sure.
You've spoken about them a little bit and how you use them, and I mean, I tried them as well, but I never really felt compelled to stick with them. It was always more tempting from how comfortable I already felt with it to the aesthetics. Again, just talking about how the sword just kind of cuts through. Like it looked good to use it. It felt good to play with it. I was already comfortable with that, and they didn't necessarily force me to try out the axe. Like it wasn't a scenario that really made it obvious to me that the axe is the way to go here, or this is the best thing to use here. So I never changed. And then of course it's possible to miss some of these weapons altogether, so that there's this weird balance in the sense that you don't want to force someone down a path and then them not have the actual tool to get the job done. Something that might potentially be, a whole other region of the world so it's a tricky point to strike. I can understand why the default is the sword and must be the sword, but it would have been nice to even just have it structured in a way but it will be easier if you use this, and just whether that's a little visual cue, a straight up prompt, which I wouldn't have liked so much, but something that kind of guides you towards, hey, this is the way to go. Let's try it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was certainly something that I thought could be done better. I guess it's just like when you get a new weapon, whatever the game is, you want to use it, you want to try it out, and feel like it's better than what you had before.
And that's the thing, I didn't quite feel that. I didn't feel the need to try that.
Yeah, a lot of the time, it's like, okay, yeah. It's like, it's kind of like in, let's use an extreme example, but Borderlands 3, there's like 1 million guns, and that's the opposite, where there's 1 million guns and you pick up so many of them that it's like, is this one better than what I have? Doesn't look like it. I'll just sell it or whatever. Like it's
the point of difference is so small.
Yeah, and so that's another example of how that doesn't work for me. So I just kind of wish that the weapons that you got were actually better or more useful as the game progresses. Maybe you can like upgrade each weapon. Maybe there's enemies that are more susceptible to an axe. Like you can one shot them instead of having less swings but doing slightly more damage. Like it just never seemed really worth it. So it's hard to know whether they just put that in there as some variety for the player, as like what they aesthetically lean towards, and like none of the weapons were designed to be like weaker. It's more of a preference, but like that's something that I prefer in this kind of game, is like feeling like you're improving not just as a player but as the character in the equipment that you're using. The trophy list sucks in this game. I think we can agree.
Yeah, I'll agree with that one.
I had actually finished with 30% of the trophies, which is better than what I thought it was going to be. And that was going out of my way to get a couple of them. But yeah, it's not one of those trophy lists that you look at and you go, oh, this is going to be fun. Like I can't wait to get all these trophies and play through the game. Like you could easily finish the game with 5 trophies, and
that's how I did when I finished the Xbox version, 5 achievements. And like, I mean, I guess to that point, like when I played it on Xbox in the first place, it was pre-launch. Xbox doesn't necessarily make things quite as easy as PlayStation to kind of check out your achievements before a game is actually launched. It's a little bit more fiddly. So I didn't really check that out until the game actually launched, and I got a bit of a look at it and realised what else was there. I'd finished the game at that point, and I'm going, this is fantastic. I can't wait to go, and when this comes out on PlayStation, I'm going to get the platinum for this thing. I swear. And I scrolled through the list, and when I saw the one that requires you to complete the game with nothing else other than the umbrella, which does half the damage of the sword, I cracked the shits, and that's it. It's over. I'm not getting this platinum. I don't care how great I think this game is. I can't put myself through that. Now I should say, and we'll see what happens, whether it actually plays out. My patched co-host Matto Phillips has publicly declared that he is going to do it, and Doug from Power Up is offering him a slab of beer if he can do it. So I suspect he'll do it now. I think that's a challenge he'll
I
take
guess
on. And
there's no difficulty settings in the game, is there?
no, the only difficulty is basically as a result of pursuing that one particular trophy, which is everything becomes doubly as hard, I guess, or you need to be.
You have to hit everything twice as much.
Yeah, exactly. So, good luck to you, Matto.
So that's it's like a self-imposed hard mode, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. But otherwise, the trophy's pretty rough.
So we're through to, I guess, the recommendation phase of the podcast, and I mean, Paul, it sounds like you do definitely recommend Death's Door.
I mean, as I said at the beginning of the show, I've been shouting to the hills, and even most recently, a feature on the Player 2 website in like the last week or so, where I said, in spite of everything, this is still the game of the year. I was saying it in July, and I'm saying it now, and I doubt anything is going to surface in the next month that is going to potentially change my mind. This is the best game of the year, by far.
Yeah, that is interesting. And it's been... I was talking to Brendan about this the other day. Like, for me, it hasn't been a year with like a clear like masterpiece in the way that last year there was...
I can see that.
Last of Us Part 2. You know, years prior, we had like Red Dead, we had God of War, Horizon... So it hasn't been that type of year, but there's been so many great like 8.5 out of 10 level experiences. It's just been like one after another, and this slots into that list with me. So for me, it's still like I think Deathloop's probably at the top, and then Ratchet and Clank in this game. I'm playing Guardians of the Galaxy at the moment, and I'm feeling like that might make its way right to the top.
How good is it? It's so good.
If it holds up, I'm only in like chapter 3, and I've got high expectations now that I've started it. But to mention this little indie in the same breath of those like huge AAA Marvel PlayStation exclusives, like it's a pretty big thing to put it on that level as a game that's majority made by two dudes. So congrats to Acid Nerve and Devolver. You've made a great game, and I don't know if it's fair to say that it's gone under the radar. It's sold, as we saw, like 100,000 copies in its first week.
Yeah.
But not hitting the multi-platforms at launch, I think, may have hurt the overall kind of
impact,
awareness. Yeah, the impact and the awareness that this game's out there. The Switch is certainly a great home for this if it runs well. I can't imagine why it wouldn't, but I think it would look really well and play really well on the Switch. So
yeah, I mean, I suspect they've had a few months now to work on that and get it ready. I'd imagine the PS5 and Switch versions were probably ready at the same time the Xbox one was, and it was just a business deal that's led to this delay. So they've had a bit of time to optimize and tweak that version to make sure it's all good, I would have thought.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's a fantastic entry for the action RPG genre. It's a more accessible progression from Titan Souls, and I think it's the best indie that I've played this year. I'm not sure at this point if I would ever replay it, but I would definitely highly recommend it to anyone who enjoys a bit of a challenge and a game that's original enough that you won't feel like you've played the same thing time and time over, which a lot of games are a twist on something that you've played before. And I think there's enough here to the combination of elements that'll feel fresh enough. So yeah, definitely recommend from me. All right, we're going to move into spoiler territory. This is your chance, dear listeners. If you haven't played Death's Door yet, pause the episode, go and download it, give it a playthrough, finish the game, come back, and tell us what your favourite moments are. Paul, what was the best moment of Death's Door?
Avarice, every single time you go there.
Yeah.
But I've spoken about that a lot. So moving on from Avarice, the little character that we meet early on in the piece when you're going after the first of your key targets, the Urn Witch, and you come across Pothead, which, I mean, the name obviously just elicits a little chuckle, but even like excluding that, like it's a dude that's through a bit of magic has had his head turned into a pot. It's filled with food. He offers you that food. Are you eating his brain as a result? If you took it, if you did that, I don't know, but like all the exchanges with Pothead are fantastic, and he's just like he's a little cute, endearing character, who then conveniently by being called Pothead also prompts a few extra laughs. Like that's great. But one of the other highlights for me comes right towards the end, so big spoiler sort of territory now. The Grey Crow, who's the one that basically sends you out on this quest in the first place. He kind of, you actually get one of these big souls. Let's call him a Titan soul, for example, because they're quite large. But you get one of these. You get one of these souls, and he knocks you out and steals it off you. It's all explained to you why he did that and how it didn't work, and you needed to go get more of these souls.
He really screws you over with that.
Yeah.
I was like,
dog act.
I was like, it's a good thing. It was a good thing that the player's a silent protagonist, because they'd be fuming. Like, you've damned me, basically.
He's screwed everyone, but it's not ideal. But yeah, like you retrieve all these souls, you get back, cracks the door open, gets the other side of the door, and it appears as though there's nothing. And the descent into kind of insanity just occurs so rapidly, but it all feels good, feels still natural and obvious, and I could see why that would happen. You've been trapped in this place for so long, it seems like you're never going to get out. But he goes from very even keeled to suddenly absolutely losing his mind, and it flies into one of the coolest looking boss encounters of the whole game, in this very white background, and it's just this black mass that he's huge, and he just comes hurtling across it. Combine that with your swords flailing as well, like it's a visual feast, that encounter. So
it really is. I love that. And the way I don't know if did the camera move to be more top down for that section, or was that
I think a little bit. I think just a little bit. It's only subtle.
And the lack of, because there's no background, it's really just the black of the crow against a white ground. There's a little patch in the middle that kind of centers you, like just a bit of a flooring, and otherwise it's just whenever you hit the crow and a little tiny crow like comes off, like breaks off it as an extra enemy, like that adds depth and layers to give you some perspective of where you are. And I love that as not just a visual element, but just the feeling that it evokes as it becomes purely black and white, and the red of the sword, or is it red or a pink, like whatever it is.
It's a weird somewhere in between,
pink, a reddish pink. That was certainly like a very memorable visual. But you've mentioned Pothead as well. I just think the characters in general are all such a almost rogues gallery of quirky little delights. Like, I got extreme anime vibes out of so many of them, like so much Studio Ghibli influence. I don't know if that's an actual thing or just the way that I read it, but you're talking about the grandma in the Urn Witches area, like that felt like something out of Spirited Away. The Frog King, again, could easily be like a Studio Ghibli thing. I definitely felt some of those kinds of crazy, wild vibes of anime with a game that in other ways has really nothing to do with like JRPGs or anything like that. So it made it really fun. Like, you've got Jefferson, the human cook, who's really just an octopus controlling a dead person, and figuring out that at first I was like, why is this cook? Why is there an octopus behind him? And I was like, oh, wait, okay, he keeps talking about how he's a human. He's clearly overcompensating for something.
Yeah,
it's an octopus controlling a dead corpse, which sounds like really grotesque, but it's just hilarious.
It's endearing. It's really endearing the way they deliver it.
And none of the characters really, like, Jefferson gives you some hints about where to find some secrets and some shrines, which is handy. But the other ones, as far as like Pothead comes along with you for a bit of a ride, and there's the Bard that comes along for a bit of a ride, but they're really kind of just there. They don't actually do anything. It's just kind of, I guess, to make you feel less like you're in this on your own. So yeah, they were the moments that stood out in terms of the color of the game. But for the actual gameplay, like every time I beat a boss, I mentioned that moment where you hit the final strike and realize that you've finally done it. And then the moments as well where you realize what you need to do to beat them. The Frog King in particular was a surprising one for me, because no matter what you do, it gets to a point in that fight where there's no more platforms to stand on. And you're like, well, I guess the fight's over. And so initially I'm like, okay, is there a way that I can prevent the platform from disappearing? And then you realize, oh, it's actually just, I have to beat him in a certain amount of time. It's basically they've given you a time limit to do
just
it.
Go nuts.
So you can't,
yeah,
you can't like sit back and be too careful. You just have to take every hit. You know, every time he pulls back for a set animation, that's my chance to like get in like 5 or 6 hits that I wasn't getting in my original strategy. And those things all add up to get you across the line. And it's moments like that you feel like you figured it out, and you feel like you're getting the hang of what the game's trying to challenge you with.
Couldn't have said it any better.
Well, good, because I did it for you. So we talked about nitpicks and gripes for the non-spoilery stuff. Is there anything for you as far as like spoiler territory of things you wanted to mention? Least favorite moments, perhaps?
For a little bit of insight for people watching there, we've got a Google Doc here that we're referring to, and I wrote NA. Not applicable in this particular case. No, there's really nothing that strikes me.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, we referenced the combat before on kind of the mechanical, non-spoilerish side. There's that. But in terms of everything else, no. Like, I guess we kind of highlighted early on that the story itself it's not extravagant. Like, it's a little bit, I wouldn't 100% go as far as to say it's predictable, but when the certain things play out, you could, like, it's pretty easy to say, oh yeah, okay, like that makes sense. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I'm not as enamored with the game as you are, as much as I loved it. So I will say it, Paul. I think that the story was kind of predictable.
Yeah, okay.
Not that you can see it coming.
Well,
from
like
the
I said, I didn't say I
start
think it was
of the game.
unpredictable. It just wasn't surprising, I suppose.
Yeah. There's no big twists. There's no big turns. And when there are twists, you see them coming like a few steps ahead. Like it's not like you can see it at the very beginning of the game. Like, oh, like this is totally going to happen by the end of the game. It's more like you can always see a few steps ahead of where you are.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, it's I wrote in the doc, the story was perfectly mediocre, and that's not an insult. Like, mediocre has a connotation to be bad, but really it just means like it's perfectly
middling,
you know, on par, average. Like, it gets the job done. It as I said before, it motivates you to keep pushing through the game. I had no real issues with it, but at the same time, and you know, the writing was good, but it wasn't like I was sitting there going like, what's going to happen next? I can't wait to see the next cutscene. Like, it's that, I don't think that's what they necessarily wanted to do, and I think they knew what they had there, because almost every encounter is basically going for laughs or for a bit of levity, and some humor, even with like the Lord of Doors the first time you encounter them. So I don't think that's insulting to say what I've just said. I hope it isn't.
No, I think it's pretty reasonable.
As a writer, I think that they have done a really good job. It's just that they haven't tried to do anything crazy, and that's fine. Like, they stayed in the pocket, and they knew that the strength was the gameplay. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. As far as like the ending, that last big boss fight, tell me what you thought about that experience, because it is quite epic. I guess epic's the right word, because it starts off and you have like a bit of a back and forth, just like you're striking them and they're not putting up too much of a fight. You move into more of a platforming section, and when you die, it takes you back to the start of the platforming section rather than the very beginning of the fight. So it made me think, okay, they're giving us like some checkpoints within,
which was good,
big boss fight. But then that's the only checkpoint really until I think the very end when you have to
there's
fight
kind of
them
those
again.
distinct 3 stages. So you've obviously highlighted the first 2, and then once you get through that platforming sequence, there's then basically the final encounter with the Lord of Doors in there, where they are doing a bit of a kitchen sink style approach, throwing everything at you. But within that, there's a few waves that you've got to make it through. So that's one of those ones where I died a lot, just as I was trying to get comfortable, get my sea legs with the whole thing the first time around.
Yeah, it was definitely like what we said already before, like a sequence where you always knew what you needed to do, but to do it perfectly, because there's like 4 or 5 different rooms. You want to get to that section without losing any health, or you want to, get to that section with still enough to know that, okay, I need to at least have half of my health by the last fight, or whatever it might be. So that was a real challenge to overcome in terms of just consistently memorizing every single movement was easy enough, but to actually execute it was where the challenge came into it, I think.
I mean, that health sort of approach, and you go, I need to have at least this. Like, that was certainly what was going on in my head, but I'd always get in my own head when I started thinking like that. Like, I really need to. When I actually succeeded the first time, I didn't look at the health the entire time. Like, I just totally got in the zone, and that's where I succeeded. There were several other times where, like, I gotten through this stage untouched. I got through the next stage untouched, got to the third one, and I knew that. I'm like, okay, I'm in the box seat here. Like, I just need to do this, and I wiped. And like, I'd already worked out what it is I needed to do, and I just got wiped off the court. So I was actually at my best when I just... And maybe I took a couple hits in that first stage. I couldn't tell you. Maybe I took one in the second stage. Couldn't tell you. But I was just totally in the zone with what I needed to do and how I needed to do it, and finally got there. So
it's a great fight, that one at the end against the Lord, where there's probably like 4 or 5 different attacks that he has, and in and of themselves they're not difficult, but when they're happening concurrently, like that you're getting a fireball at you
one
from
into
the
the
left
other
while
into the other.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I guess gotta be clear, what is he about to do, because it's almost sequential. Like, after he does that move, he does the next move, and it's just being like, okay, I need to get to that side of the room while he powers up, and then I need to dodge 3 times, but don't dodge that way because I'm going to get hit by a flying door. And then it's a lot to kind of like get your head around and try and keep on top of, and you'll inevitably slip up and lose, like get hit here or there. Sometimes it's a couple quick hits and you're like, damn it. But it's so satisfying to finally finish that off. And there is a secret ending. I don't think either of us have played it, so we can't talk about it.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the plan is to do that with this PlayStation playthrough. But there's an item that drops after you beat the Lord of Doors, and that kind of prompts...
What's the item? I can't even remember.
I think there was like a key. So you might have noticed it just north of where Death's Door is, where the Grey Crow is kind of based for the entirety of the game. There's like a little castle with a cage around it that you can't access through the main game. It actually unlocks that, and then there's a few other little things you need to do. There's a few things you need to chase down.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember that area now.
That triggers an encounter.
Sense.
I've learned about what that encounter is.
I'm guessing it's related to the Crypt Keeper that you can't kill at the beginning of the game as well.
Yeah.
Because I kept going back to him when I upgrade my attack.
Take a swing, see if I can do it.
Take a swing. Yeah, another thing that I forgot to mention, I almost never used my heavy attack in the game. Did you ever do that one where you like, and it never felt like in the moment like the right thing to do, to take a slower approach when you can just do two quick strikes. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. That's Death's Door. I think we've covered everything. I mean, everything that I wanted to say. Is there anything left unsaid, Paul?
I mean, have I mentioned that it's Game of the Year yet?
I think you mentioned that.
It's the Game of the Year. You should go play it.
Yeah, it's on every console now, so definitely go play it. I'm very curious what it's like on the Switch, so let us know if you've hit it up on the Nintendo, how you found it, how it holds up, how it looks on perhaps that OLED
The
screen.
OLED. Maybe
really
I do need to get it on the Switch.
But dear listeners, of course, if you want to support the Hungry Gamers and 8-Bit, you can head over to shop8bit.net and pick up some of that tasty merch to put on your bod. If you want to really back us, you can get to Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/weare8bit. That is the best way to chip in a few dollars. You might be able to pick up an 8-bit Founders Coin. You might be able to join in on the 8-bit family portrait, become immortalized as a Star Wars character. And everything that goes into the Ko-fi page keeps the lights on for us, hosting fees, all of that stuff that we don't want to have to think about, just keeps things ticking along. Paul, what's happening with Player 2? What's happening with Dev Diary that you can talk about or tease at this point?
Yeah, so Dev Diary, I won't even bother tease. I'll just straight up announce it, and then we'll see whether it's public already by that point or not. Depends on when this ultimately goes live. With a little bit of help from PlayStation Australia, Siobhan Reddy, so Australian, head of Media Molecule. She's in town at the moment, and I got to chat to her for half an hour for the latest episode of Dev Diary. So tune into that one. It's pretty rapid fire, given the time constraints that we've got there. But she was a fantastic guest, talking about her career in the industry so far, and very, very thankful to PlayStation for the opportunity for making that happen. And she was a fantastic guest. You can look forward to that one at a special time of 1 a.m. on Wednesday.
Set your alarm clocks.
Set your alarm clock. Wednesday, 1 a.m. That's the 1st of December.
Yeah, maybe wake up to it and listen to it with breakfast.
Yeah, don't rush yourself. Like, even I'll accept that one. Like, if I go and look at my graph afterwards and I see, okay, it bottomed out a little bit at the beginning, I'd understand why. I'll let you off the hook. It's okay.
Sure.
Especially since it's not when people are familiar with the episode going up anyway. It's about a day early. So there's that. And on the Player 2 side, lots of stuff at this point. We are getting towards that pointy end of the year. Lots of reviews coming out. I churned out quite a few in the last week alone. And I've still got a few to kind of wade through as well. Put a piece up there talking about the sticking power of Death's Door. I was talking about Jurassic World Evolution 2. I've previewed Elden Ring. I've all sorts that's kind of going on at the moment. Some other little features as well. Go check out the Player 2 website there, player2.net.au, for some really cool stuff. We also had a redesign recently. The site is looking gorgeous now, so please go check that out too.
Indeed. On my end of things, we've got a Shanghai Noon Comedy Rewind coming out with Logan Wilkinson from That Nerdy Site. So that will be out on Wednesday. It's also awards season for 8-bit, so get your submissions in for the biddies if you are yet to do so. I think it's a very tight race in a couple of the categories, so your votes could make or break a couple of those. I don't think Death's Door is leading the way with Indie of the Year, so Paul, if you haven't voted yet...
How many accounts do I need to create to do this? Like, I'll create burners.
Yeah. If it suddenly comes from behind to win, we might have to do a recount and check some IP addresses. But until then, there's plenty happening with 8-bit. You can catch me on Twitter at Jono himself. You can catch Paul at Paul James Games. Follow 8-bit at We Are 8-bit. Stay tuned and stay hungry.